It looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind. It either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
What are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Zia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Hey, this is Dan from Cayuga, New York, and you're listening to the best podcast in all the land, Sasquatch Chronicles.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you. We're going to be chatting with Nick, and Nick is actually an active duty member in the United States military, and he'll be sharing with us a very strange experience he had out there at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and he wasn't the only one to experience it. And what's cool about Nick is Nick actually started an Instagram account, and if you're on Instagram, go and check him out. Nick is under Tales from the Grid Square, and what Nick does is he's got access to these soldiers, and soldiers will send him in different experiences that have happened to them, very strange, odd encounters that they've had, whether they're veterans or active duty, and Nick posts it up on Instagram, so he'll be sharing some of those with us tonight. And again, if you're on Instagram, check him out, Tales from the Grid Square. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Nick to the show. Nick, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Wes. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Nick, I'm honored to have you on. And, you know, without guys like you, as a nation, we're nothing. So thank you so much for your service. I know a lot of bizarre encounters are sent to you, and you post them up on Instagram. And there was an experience that you had out there at Fort Polk, Louisiana. If you would, tell us about it.
Yeah, sure thing, Wes. So just put it out there. So I'm in the Army. I won't say my rank or name or anything like that. And I guess since I said that, I have to add that my views and expressions don't reflect the United States military or the Army or anything like that. These are just my own. But I have to say that for legal reasons. But going forward, so Fort Polk, people who are not familiar, anyone in the military will know the infamous Fort Polk, but it is a military base out in Louisiana, Leesville, Louisiana to be precise, and it covers a huge footprint of land. And it is set aside because it is the home of what is known as JRTC, the Joint Readiness Training Center. And so that is basically where the Army sends some of its divisions to train as if they were going to fight in like a real war or whatever war we're training for. So if you're in light infantry division, so if that's 82nd, 10th Mountain Division, any division that doesn't involve tanks or vehicles, wheeled vehicles, they go there to train. So I was part of a big logistics unit that was supporting the whole operation, and we were sent into the box, which is known as that's what we call the training area, is the box. And so that is a huge, like I said, huge chunk of land. There's some parts that are like deep in there. That you'll not going to see any civilians. Pitch black, no ambient light. It gets pretty remote in some places. So there was one period where it was very early in the exercise. So we just started. We've gone live. It was late at night. So I had just finished coming back from like a sync that we do every night in the battalion. And I was going back to my sleep area. And so where I was along the C wire, which is like, think of it's concertina wire. So it's like barbed wire, but more beefed up to, I guess, create more of an obstacle. And we're sleeping along the C wire. And I decided to be that guy that I want to sleep away from everyone for privacy. So I'm a little off further down the line. And I'm pretty much at the end of the C wire where it opens up into like thick forest. And so just to kind of orientate you to the terrain, is so when I sit down in my tent and I look out, there is really thick brush. You really can't see, but about 10, 15 feet in, it kind of drops into a like a ravine of some type, like I guess like a little ravine. So like you could really walk in there like in about 10, 15 feet, like disappear. Really hard to see. So anyways, I'm coming back. It's late at night. There's not a lot of ambient lights, cloudy that night, so it's pretty much pitch black. I have MVGs, but they don't really do much because MVGs will amplify the ambient light. So I'm walking back, find a way back to my tent, and I sit down in my tent. I turn on my red light, and then I start taking off my boots, getting ready for bed. Well, all of a sudden, a pine cone lands at my feet. I look down, and of course, it takes me by surprise because it's quiet, it's pitch black, and thinking like, oh, that's weird. But I'm sleeping underneath a pine cone tree, so I don't think anything of it. It's just like it fell. So I go back to do my business, and another one lands at my feet. And I was like, oh, that's weird. I mean, this pine cone tree must be really dropping these things. And I get this feeling to look up, and as I look up, a pine cone comes flying out of the woods and smacks me right in the face. Like, hits me right, like, dead center. And so now I'm like, okay, somebody is messing with me. So I turn off my light, and I'll pause right here to mention, so at JRTC, there are American soldiers who play like the bad guy, right? We're nicknamed for them is Geronimo. That's like the nickname for the bad guys out there, or the G-man, quote unquote. So sometimes they go and they will like probe your defenses and try to like infiltrate you or do stuff to mess with you. So I'm thinking like, oh, is this about to happen? So I turn off my light and I wait, and another pine cone comes flying out of the woods. And so I'm thinking like, okay, this is somebody messing with me or somebody like really, really trying to like push me here. So I turn on my MVGs and I put them up to my eye. And of course, because there's no ambient light, I can't see anything because the woods are so thick. It's really hard to pick up anything. I use the IR strobe that is on the MVGs and turn it, and it kind of shoots out. We can't see it in the naked eye, but on the MVGs, it looks like a bright flashlight. And I don't see anything. Don't even see like, any eye shine of an animal, nothing like that. But what I do see is another pine cone come flying out of the darkness and land right on my tent. And I'm just sitting there like, okay, this is not good. So I put my MVGs up, I zip up my tent, I get down, and I'm waiting for the inevitable, like they're going to come through the wire and come drag me into the woods. The Geronimo, that is. But nothing happens. And what instead happens is pine cones keep raining on my tent for about, I would say maybe like 2-3 minutes, like just bouncing off my tent. And occasionally there's rocks, like really small ones. And it's just my tent. And I'm just like, what is going on? Like I am officially freaked out. Like somebody is maybe messing with me, or I'm about to get jumped by G-Man. And then it stops. And kind of think nothing of it, go to sleep. I wake up the next morning and I go talk to our security element and our S2, who is our intelligence officer. And I kind of tell him like, hey, I just want to let you know something weird happened last night. And I had like pine cones and rocks thrown at my tent. And I really couldn't see who it was. I don't know if it was someone messing with me, but it was beyond the sea wire and the wood line. So it was either if one of the soldiers was pranking us, they really were stupid and went beyond the sea wire, or if it was Geronimo, they were probing us. And he was like, you're not the only one to say that. Pretty much everyone on that line of sea wire where we were further down from me had pine cones and rocks thrown at them all night, including like the battalion XO, who was like, yeah, there's people like throwing like bigger rocks at him, like kind of like heavier ones. And nobody got hurt, luckily. And we just kind of like laughed it off as a joke, and thinking it was Geronimo kind of probing us for whatever reason, throwing rocks, because they have been known to do that. But then the OCs, so OCs are other Army personnel, think of them as like graders. So they're there to grade you on how you perform. They look at us like we're crazy, and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, we did not have anyone here last night to come and mess with you and probe your defenses, because they would have been here right now. We would have been talking about how you didn't respond. So that didn't happen. It must have been somebody playing a prank. And we all just like kind of laugh it off as a joke. But I was just like, that was still very strange because it never happened again. So where it does get weird, and so flash forward, we're done. I'm back at home. My neighbor was also at JRTC with me, and he was in another unit, but we were co-located. So we were at no more the farthest like 30 minutes away from each other because we directly supported each other. And so we were drinking beers like one night, and I told him, hey, did anything weird happen to you? And he looked at me and he was like, what do you mean by weird? And so I told him the pine cone story and the little rocks thing thrown at me too. And he was just like, wait, that happened to you also? And I looked at him like, what do you mean this happened to you as well? And he told me, so his story kind of like this is where it puts the weirdness on it more. And so when I had the pine cones thrown at me, his unit was no more than like 800 meters up the road. And so where he was, his unit basically bordered the same ravine on the far opposite side. Not really so opposite, but basically he bordered like that same ravine, and he slept on the sea wire, and he slept far away from everyone else. And he had the same thing happen to him. He said, yeah, I was sitting there and pine cones and rocks started coming from the wood line, landing on my tent. And I thought that was the weirdest thing because I've been to JRTC before and I've never had Geronimo or anyone do that. And I know for a fact no soldier should walk past the sea wire because they could get in serious trouble. So he then proceeds to tell me that even more weird stuff happened to him. He went to another location called Geronimo DZ, which is way deep at like the farthest ends of the training area. And it's basically like a gigantic open field. It's called, the DZ is drop zone. So it's basically a huge open field that they use for air assaults or like paratroopers dropping in. So he told me that, again, they were out there. They set themselves up in the wood line. He decided, again, to be separate like me from everyone else for privacy. And he slept away from the sleep area along the sea wire. But where he slept, the sea wire ended because there was another ravine that went deep in from what I remember him telling me. And so he said, though, when he was at this location, this is where it gets weird, is he started seeing, like at twilight hours, like dusk and dawn, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He started seeing black shadows moving deep in the wood line, trying to stay out of sight. And he described them as, it looked like a large humanoid figure. And he said while they were there, and they were there for about 72 hours, he started seeing them more and more and more in the wood line. And not only did he see them, but other people would see them too. We do this thing called like stand down. And it's basically everybody gets out on the perimeter at dawn or dusk because, statistically that has been like the time somebody will attack is during those hours because they're transitional periods. He said when he was out online, the soldiers farther down from him who were also out online started yelling like, oh, whoa, did you see that thing in the wood? What is that? It's huge. Like seeing the same shadow he saw running in the woods away from them. Where it gets weirder too is he said he started hearing weird noises at night, and he called them shrieks, yowls, just weird grunts, weird noises. Now this guy, he is a good old boy from like West Virginia, lived in like the deep woods his whole life. He says like, I know what cats sound like, I know what deer sound like, I know what all sorts of animals sound like, and what I was hearing was none of those. Like, I could not explain what I was hearing, but it was freaky and it was weird. But he said the last night they were there, and this is the part where it kind of shook him up, was he said that as he was sleeping in his tent, something came up. He woke up like feeling like he was watched. And he said something had come up to his tent, and it looked like it was leaning down, and he could hear like breathing or sniffing or something like that. And he said that it was a huge shadow that basically cast darkness over him because there was a full moon that night. And he was just sitting there unmoving, like, what is going on? And he said, like, it was the longest, like, few seconds of his life. But eventually the thing stood up, turned around, and, like, walked away. And, like, then that following morning, they left that area, and he didn't really see anything else over there.
Yeah, it's strange. It reminds me of almost every encounter I've heard from Fort Lewis here in Washington State, or even the Yakima Training Center. Very, very similar encounters. And I might have missed it there in the beginning, Nick. When you talk about sea wire, is that like like a perimeter you guys can't leave? Is that what you mean when you say sea wire?
No, so it's actually so sea wire is called concertina wire, and it's literally like barbed wire. You know how barbed wire comes in the big spools?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
So it's very similar to barbed wire, but instead of the little barbs that really kind of are uncomfortable, they don't really hurt you. They have like hooks, so like you can get caught up on these things, and it's meant to slow you down and prevent people from walking through. Because if you try to run through sea wire, you're going to get caught up and cut up. It's a very good obstacle. So that's what I mean by sea wire was what we were along.
Yeah, I definitely understand what you mean. I wanted to ask you, we were talking earlier about the box witch. Is that something what is a box witch? And is that something that happened to you out there in Louisiana?
So yes, so funny other thing. So after this, we had finished talking. I started doing some research, like very amateur stuff, and I want to make myself sound smarter than I really am. But I started looking around and asking people through actually on Instagram. So I'll back up. Instagram has, of course, all sorts of pages and whatever. But there's there are mill meme pages, what we call them, and they're basically, if you could think of any niche in the military, there's an Instagram page for it, making jokes or posting things that are like specific to that niche. It's kind of hilarious. But there were guys who are stationed at Fort Polk, and I had asked them, like, hey, like, does weird stuff happen there? And I told them my story. And so what they informed me was, so they don't believe in it, the person I spoke with, but they do say like weird stuff does happen there. And it's kind of colloquially known. The nickname for it is the box witch. So like that's box witch. It's kind of a funny name, but I guess it's like an all encompassing term for the weird stuff that happens there. So not only possibly Sasquatch, because I did look up Bigfoot Field Research Organization, just typing in, Sasquatch Fort Polk. And there's a couple reports that came up, I think the most recent being like 2006 or something like that, of people seeing like literally like what we describe as a Sasquatch running around Leesville, Louisiana. So that's where I got thinking like, maybe there's something more to this. I started asking around, and I found that there are some really weird things that happen in the box. Not only potential Sasquatch sightings, other cryptid sightings like the White Walkers, potentially Dogman, orbs. Like I saw orbs out there, which I can explain in a second. Weird weathered patterns. Like this one guy said that he was standing out there with his buddies, and literally a block of ice, like the size of a boulder, fell from the sky. And he said, like, bear in mind, like, this is dusk, right? It's nighttime. We can't see anything above us, but like planes or anything. But there's no clouds, and this block of ice just came out of nowhere. Other weird weather phenomena that just occur out of nowhere. And just, of course, hauntings and ghosts and just other weird stuff. And they kind of like wrap it all up into this term known as the box witch. And they're like, oh, you ran into the box witch. You had an experience. The box witch got you, or something like that.
Yeah, that's fascinating, especially coming up with the whole box witch to kind of encompass everything. You guys should have used an acronym. You guys use an acronym for everything. The block of ice is weird. Having on a clear day, have a block of ice fall from the sky.
Yeah, and so what's even funnier is the Army has several other big training sites like JRTC. So there's National Training Center, NTC, in Fort Irwin, California, and Joint Mission Readiness Center, JMRC, in Hohenfels. I think I got that acronym right. In Hohenfels, Germany. And each one of those places has their own variation of a box witch legend, because just weird stuff happens out there.
It's kind of a cool set of keywords to search for, box witch. I'm going to have to kind of look into that. Tell me about the lights. So you saw the lights out there at Fort Polk. Tell me about that.
So I saw I guess I'll describe them as orbs, right? I saw them the same time I had the little pine cone experience, same block of time. It was probably maybe 4 to 5 days later in a completely different location. It was actually in the area of Peace on Ridge, which I've had a map I pointed out, but it's basically north of where I was before, farther off, more out in the sticks, very, very like deserted place, off post, kind of like its own big training area. So we were out there continuing our rotation training, and I saw something that I can only describe as an orb. And I had known what they were, the phenomena of like people seeing orbs, but I personally had never seen one before in my life. And to put it in perspective, we're sitting at basically an abandoned farm site. Big wide open fields. There's an old hollowed out farmhouse and like horse stables and like a watering hole. And at the watering hole, there's a couple like trees that dot around it. Like you could tell like they had planted like a grove a long time ago, probably predating before the army bought the land and they moved out. But again, we were sitting there at dusk. It was we were standing down, so the sun had just gone down. We were waiting for the all clear. And so one thing I want to point out, there's fireflies around us. So I'd seen fireflies in a long time, and I was like looking at them, and like they give off that like yellowish green light. And so suddenly my eye gets caught to something, and I look over to the watering hole, which is about a good 300 meters away, and it's on like pretty much flat territory. And I noticed like this red light moving through the trees, and I'm like, "What is that?" First I thought it was a drone, right? Because they use like little quadcopter drones there. They're pretty obvious, like they have red and green lights like sit side by side, so you can see them from a like mile off, and they make a lot of noise, like a quadcopter does. And I'm sitting there and I can't hear anything but the people like moving around next to me because they were dead quiet. And I'm like, what is that thing? Like, and I see this it's literally like a bright red ball of light moving through the trees, and it leaves like a tail, I guess, as I can best describe it. It doesn't look like it's a machine. It doesn't look man-made. It looks like almost organic. It's pretty big. Like even from a distance, it was bigger than the fireflies around me. And as I was watching this, I see another one pop up, and it's green, like neon-ish green. And I'm watching these things. They're just floating through the trees, weaving in and out. Like it seems like they're just kind of doing their own thing over there. And closer to me, there's another tree line of like where I guess they had planted an orchard, and it was like the leftovers of that orchard and some dead trees. And this one was much closer. This was like maybe 100 meters, 150 meters. And I see a blue one. Same thing. Bright blue ball of light floating through. And I like nudge the guy next to me, and I look over there and I'm like, dude, do you see that? Like, what is that? And he's like, those are probably fireflies. And I'm like, dude, look again. Those are not fireflies. And he looks again and he's like, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not too sure what those are because I see blue, green, and like a red light. Like, what is that? And I'm like, dude, I don't even know. So we watch these things flitter around, and then they give us the all clear, and we have to go and conduct some duty. So I, don't get to stay there and look at them. But when I glanced over my shoulder, they were still floating around in the distance, kind of doing their own thing. Very like surreal kind of weirdness.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've seen them too. They're very odd. It's very, very strange. And I know at 300 yards, what is that? Just under 1,000 feet. I don't know if that's accurate or not. It's my American education, so blame them. But I mean, you're at a close distance, but it's not right next to you. How big do you think they were?
I would say my best estimate was when I saw the one closer was this like the size of a fist, maybe like a grapefruit or a little smaller than a grapefruit, but that's what it looked like to me. But what was weird was it was like the light was hazy, if that makes sense. It wasn't like bright, like a man-made light.
Yeah, most eyewitnesses describe them as being kind of a soft light.
Yeah, that's the right word for it. It was very surreal, and it wasn't like it was more like, hey, what is that? Like, but I didn't feel like it was threatening or anything like that. It like looked like they were just going about their business, doing whatever they were doing out there.
Did you ever tell anyone about that on the base, or do you guys even report stuff like that?
So I didn't really mention it to anyone because people would just think I was crazy. The dude kind of like brushed it off as it's like just a play of the light or whatever. I didn't think it was. I thought it was weird enough that it kind of made me stop and really consider like, what is that? I know everyone else was so tired and exhausted. I think that they were just like not even really paying attention to it. In terms of like talking, I haven't talked to enough people yet to like get that. I'm still trying from the page, trying to get people to submit some more stories. So I haven't really gotten too much orb stuff.
Yeah, the balls of light are very strange, and until you see one, it's kind of hard to explain to someone. It's a real soft light. It's not bright. They're not solid, but they are. And it's like this weird self-generating light flying around, and they're strange. And they've been reported throughout history. I mean, even Christopher Columbus talked about seeing one out on the Santa Maria. He put it in the ship's log, called everyone up to come look at this weird light flying around. What's your take on the lights, Nick? I'm curious. What's your opinion? What do you think that they are?
I personally, I think that they're some type of spirits or something. And I'm a very spiritual guy, and I believe in like an afterlife. And, I believe that there is a spiritual world around us we don't really understand. And from other prior experiences I've had in my life, I do believe that there's some type of spirit.
Yeah, if you ask most Native Americans, they'll tell you it's a spirit and to stay far, far away from them. I mean, some Native Americans will give you a different story, but I think the general consensus among them is that it's bad and stay away from it. And, even in World War II, the pilots would see those balls of light. They called them Foo Fighters, and they were terrified of them. And I would imagine they were scared of a midair collision.
I do think from when I witnessed it that there is a intelligence there, because the way they were moving around through the trees was like they were obviously avoiding them, but like they would weave in and out of a tree. If like I was walking and the tree trunks were in front of me, and I would just kind of like brush up against it and walk around like the other one. It looked like there was an intelligence to it. Like, they were like moving around looking at stuff, I guess. That's the way I can describe it.
Yeah, it gets reported a lot. It actually gets reported a lot. For a while there, I was getting more balls of light experiences than I was Bigfoot experiences. And it makes me wonder what's really going on here. And before we get into some of the encounters that have been sent to you via your Instagram, Tales from the Grid Square, I want to ask you, Nick, what do you think Sasquatch is? Obviously, there's no wrong answer, but I'm very curious on your opinion.
So, I kind of agree with your last, I guess it was the last episode with Jack. And I think it is some type of animal or relic hominid. I think it is, I think a lot of the phenomena that people see with Sasquatch that kind of like lends credence to like maybe something not an animal, I think is maybe a separate phenomena. But I think these are an animal a lot like the the Highland gorilla. People forget the Highland gorilla was discovered fairly recently, and people thought they were a myth in that area. Like, there are these great apes living in the mountains, like you're crazy. And but they were animals that knew how to live in that environment, knew how to use that terrain to their advantage, and knew to avoid humans. And if you look at just some other weird tidbits in history, like the legends of giants and stuff in America, or how I can't remember the native tribe off the top of my head, but there are some native tribes that talk about like coming here and fighting a race of giants that ate people. They traded with them and they were peaceful, but eventually the peace deteriorated and they fought against each other before driving them away. I think it's like maybe some type of relic hominid, and I have to agree with Jack. I believe that people are aware of them, but it is such a small population to come out and say that there is an endangered relic hominid or great ape living in our backyard would pretty much upend the entire like forestry industry we have going. And I think it would cause a lot of problems for our society. I don't think it's like one of those things we're quite ready for. I think eventually we'll get disclosure, but I think it's something that is best kept secret right now for ours and their protection.
Yeah, and you could be right, Nick. It's strange to me that this creature is actually seen all over the world, yet no one can catch up with it. Let's assume it's a hominid. I was reading about hominid and hominins the other day, but we know a hominid is a type of primate. In taxonomy, a family is a group that includes one or more genus or closely related species. And I think all scientists agree that we human beings are hominids. It could also be a hominin. But there's kind of a problem with that theory. We know a hominin includes an extant genera Homo and Pan and excludes the genus of gorilla. Last week I read that on Google. I have no clue what any of it means, but if you say it with confidence and you don't mess up any of the words, it makes you sound smart. I'm just breaking your balls, man. But a serious question. What's your opinion on the fact that it's seen all over the world? In North America, it's the Sasquatch. Russia has the Omas. On the India and China border, they call it the Yeti. The Barmanu in Iran. Australia calls it the Yowie. In other areas of China, they also call it the urine. You have the rock apes in Vietnam. And so I kind of question sometimes when, especially here in the United States, you get these really cocky Bigfoot researchers that'll go, well, it's a rare animal. I'm not so sure about that. But on a serious question, Nick, do you think that the countries I mentioned have the same concerns with their lumber industry?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think the kind of same belief I have about Sasquatch maybe applies to them, and that they're also relic hominids, because we weren't just the only version, I guess, of human to walk the earth. There were many more, and if anything I've learned about humans is there is the innate capacity to survive no matter what cost. And so I think that maybe relic hominids could have survived in small communities all over the world or small groups. And I don't really know I can't really speak so much about Australia. It might be like the same thing here with maybe it would upend some of their industries. And I don't know about China. Maybe in China they have more of a different perspective on it, or in Russia, because I know Russia has a different perspective on what we would consider the paranormal. It's more ingrained, I think, in their culture than ours.
Yeah, I hear you. It's just strange to me that, all of these different countries, different cultures, different languages were separated by oceans, yet they have a name for that describes the creature that we have in North America. They just call it something different. And, even like with the Native Americans, with all the different Native American tribes, they all have a name for Sasquatch. They call it, whatever it is in their language. But if you listen to a lot of their descriptions, they're describing Sasquatch. And so, it's strange. It's also strange, in almost every Native American tribe and almost every culture in the world, they also have a flood story. They also have a giant story. It's weird. Maybe we all did speak one language at one time, and when we separated, we took events that happened in our life and we tell it through, different generations. Noah has, it goes by many different names depending on what country you're in. They all have a Noah and flood story. It's just weird. It makes me think our history, we have amnesia for our history or things that have happened in the past. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I agree with you. I think that when you start talking about legends and everybody's having the same variation of legend, there is some truth in that. You can't say it's a legend anymore if two very different cultures who have never had any contact with each other, for example, what the last interview talked about, these people in Afghanistan who had no outside connection to technology or culture like us, describing the exact same thing we would refer to as Bigfoot. There's some truth in the matter of the legend.
Yeah, it kind of makes me stop and take pause sometimes in life, Nick. I know you're younger than I am, but when I was growing up, scientists told us that the earth was not flooded. That's complete BS. You need to stay away from that Bible, that the earth absolutely was not flooded at one time. There have been floods, but not a flood over the earth. And they changed their opinion on that based on evidence. Now they say, yeah, the earth was flooded at one time. And all of these researchers, I try and take shots at researchers. It's in the Bigfoot world, it's batting practice. But a lot of them, they'll hold on to the argument of all of the Native Americans have a story about Sasquatch, and they've been talking about Sasquatch for ages. Therefore, it's true. And that's one of the arguments they hold on to. Well, the Native Americans also talk about a flood, and they also talk about one man and his family that survived it. By the way, they also talk about giants, not Sasquatch. It kind of sounds like they're talking about the Nephilim, but every tribe talks about these giants. And so you can't really pick and choose, what if you're going to use that argument, you can't pick and choose from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that is. I think a lot of people will discount that as legend because it would be an uncomfortable truth, I guess, or an uncomfortable thought to maybe sit here and question that maybe legend and myth has more truth in it than we give it credence to, or credence to. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a good point, Nick. It's definitely a good point. And I didn't mean to get off on a on a tangent there, but what I'd like to do is talk about this Instagram that you have that you started. And for the audience, go out there if you're on Instagram, follow Nick, Tales from the Grid Square, and Nick posts experiences from soldiers. Nick, do you have a couple you want to share with us tonight?
Oh, I sure do, Wes. Actually, the first one I'll share here, let me just bring them up on my iPad. So this is the first one I'll share. And so this story is very fascinating, and I'll read it. And I won't go into too much right now, but anyone who deals with this kind of like fringe idea of thinking, or, the idea of, Nephilim will instantly recognize. And what I thought was kind of a goofy conspiracy theory, when I read this story, now gives it much more credence. And so the background is, I originally got the story secondhand from basically a friend of the guy, who told me the story. The dude was kind of private, and he, got back from the war. He was kind of like hesitant to share his story. And so eventually I was able to get in contact with him directly, and was like, look, I'll keep you anonymous. That's the whole point of this page is you have stories that you would like to share, but if you don't want them to be anonymous, like, they'll be anonymous. Like, I won't put your name to it. It's just literally like maybe country and date, or like year, so I keep it very vague to keep it very like not personal identifiable information, unless you want it that way. So he eventually sent me the story. I'll read the story here. I'd like to get your opinion on this one. All right. I was deployed as an infantry team leader with the Army in the Kunar province of Afghanistan from 2008 to 2009. One night, we set up in an observation patrol to overlook a village that we suspected IEDs were coming out of due to its successful IED recovery a few weeks prior. My LT gave me the new thermal imaging system known as the Recon 3 that none of us were familiar with, and told me to figure it out and learn what I can to pass it along to the others. I started messing around with the Recon 3 to see its capabilities, and was surprised by the clarity of the images and the clarity of the zoom on it. I spent most of the time messing with the different functionalities and watching the village. I started to look across the valley to see what else I could see, and that led me to look along a spur we set in on, and saw a very large heat signature at the top of one of these false peaks. I did everything I could to keep a clear image as I could, suspecting that this was a group of Taliban huddled together around the light, as they tend to do in the mountains, when all of a sudden this heat signature stood up as one being. The trees in that area grew to be about 10 to 12 feet tall, and this thing was at least as tall, if not more elevated, than the trees around it. It started taking steps parallel to my position, and was covering ground quickly with ease. Its stride was slow and relaxed, yet it moved with incredible speed, that led me to believe that this creature must have been gigantic. It very quickly traversed the landscape, and I lost sight of it along a neighboring spur. I did not believe what I initially saw, assuming that I imagined it as if I've never seen anything like that before in my life. I didn't tell many people about this, and, well, even deployed or in the Army. Kept it to myself, thinking that I couldn't have seen what I saw. But then, in 2010, after I got out of the Army, I was listening to a coast-to-coast radio story, and I heard the story about a C-130 pilot talking about transporting a very similar-looking creature. The memory came flooding back to me, and it made me consider other things I saw during my time in the service. The C-130 pilot had discussed the creature in detail, and said it had fire orange hair, and it reminded me of a tradition the locals would do, but would not speak of where or why they would dye their hair this orange color, and specifically dye their goats this same color as well. It seemed like that every once in a while they would do this, and then all of a sudden the orange goats would all be gone, and the orange out of their hair would be gone as well. I didn't put two and two together, assuming that it was a weird cultural thing that I didn't understand. But now it makes me wonder if these creatures were these were some types of gestures to the creature, or to a Nephilim, or if the goats were sacrificed to it. I am a Christian, and the Bible briefly discusses the Nephilim, aka the men of renown. I think that is what I saw. I think that is an ancient race of giants that are descendants of fallen angels, or it could just be like a Sasquatch-like creature. I'm not sure. Of course, I only saw it on thermals, but it didn't appear to be hairy of what you'd expect a Sasquatch. It just literally looked like a huge naked man.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've actually talked to a lot of soldiers who have had bizarre experiences out there in Afghanistan. I remember one soldier told me that he was talking to the locals through a translator, and they told him not to go up to the mountain. And basically, the way what they were saying, how it got translated, was there's giants up there and they'll eat you, which sounds, crazy, but maybe not so crazy. We even have that here in North America. Sarah Wanamaka at the Lovelock Caves, the Seedica, there were these giants, and and Sarah says they were here before the Native Americans even showed up, and she bizarrely describes the red hair, and these giants that would eat people out at Mount St. Helens. Good luck trying to get a Native American to go on top of Mount St. Helens, and they have in their history that there's giants up there and they'll eat you. And for the longest time, I always thought they were talking about Sasquatch. I'm convinced they were never talking about Sasquatch. They were talking about what Sarah Wanamaka at the Lovelock Caves was talking about. They were experiencing the same thing. The red hair part is fascinating. I don't think in your traditional Christians out there that read their Bible, I don't think that the red hair is ever mentioned in the Bible. I could be wrong. It's leaving my mind for a moment. I can't think of when they were mentioned with red hair. But in other texts that you read, again, going back to what we were just talking about, in other cultures, Noah goes by a different name depending on what country you're in. They do talk about him having a red hair. And there was something about his appearance. When he was born, his father, Lamech, was pissed. He thought his wife had slept with a fallen angel. There was something about Noah's appearance that tripped Lamech out. And again, that goes through many different cultures. I won't bore you with that, but it's weird. It's really weird. What are your thoughts, Nick?
I think that I do believe at one point maybe there were giants. It's something my brother and I had a little fascination with, and we looked into. And in the United States, sometimes they're written off as hoax, but I don't think they're necessarily all hoax. Was that they had I'm familiar with that story about the tribes fighting these red-headed giants that ate people, but I'm also familiar with there's the conspiracy that the Smithsonian had found these skeletons of giants in the North America as we were settling it, and destroyed them because it had basically challenged the status quo of what was established in the scientific world. But these skeletons existed and were real. So I think that and every culture has a story of giants, and just I think that there is some credence to that. But when I had that story told to me, it was probably my favorite story, because if you're familiar with that Coast to Coast interview, I don't know if you are, Wes.
Yeah, the Kandahar giant.
Yeah, the giant of Kandahar. And, it to people in the military, it sounds like a very laughable thing, because I don't think we could keep that secret, in my opinion. But now hearing his story, it kind of maybe put some more credence to that. Maybe it's not a conspiracy. Maybe they did kill a giant out in Afghanistan and took it back.
Yeah, I get that. I think things are only covered up for so long. I think eventually the truth comes out. I know in WikiLeaks, they did an email dump back in 2018, and we dug up Nimrod, by the way. I won't bore you with that story, but we did dig up Nimrod. But in the email, and I think Hillary was the Secretary of the State at the time, in the email, they wanted to know where Nimrod's body was, and they also wanted to know where the buried Nephilim were. What a bizarre email to send Hillary Clinton. What's going on here? Why are they mentioning Nimrod and the Nephilim if it's some folklore written by this book that men wrote and claim that it comes from God? Why are they using this verbiage? It makes me wonder on a lot of things. I think the truth eventually comes out. As far as a giant being in Afghanistan, it wouldn't shock me one bit. That's a whole nother country out there. If Alexander the Great couldn't conquer it because of the landscape, it wouldn't shock me one bit, finding a giant out there.
Oh yeah. Afghanistan is so remote, and some of those places have, like we heard in the last interview, I've never encountered places. And talking to people from Afghanistan, they said you could go in those mountains and just like run into places that you never knew existed, like places that are very habitable because they're so hidden.
Yeah, and Jack went into that on that Sasquatch in Afghanistan show, and like I said, it wouldn't shock me one bit. Let me ask you, do you have another experience to share with us? Maybe a strange one?
Okay, so here's I'll do a different one right here. So this one's a little bit more of a haunting, but I like this story as well. Okay. So one story my dad tells me is when he was a pilot flying MC-130s in some place in Africa. I believe the Kalahari Desert, but he was flying low level, clear night, and good moonlight. They're very low, and he's looking through his MVGs, and they see some type of figure on the ground that looks like he's waving at the airplane. So he goes over it a couple times, and on the third time, the guy just straight up disappears in front of them. Keep in mind, this is over the savannah, no humans for around 500 miles in any direction. Everybody in the cockpit saw it. They flew over the same place a few more nights and never saw anything like it again. However, the real spooky thing is, when they were seeing this figure, the two loadmasters in the back kept coming over the intercom as if they were talking to someone besides themselves. Hey man, how did you get in here? Where did you come from? And when the flight engineer went back to see what was going on, there was only the two loadmasters, but were extremely shaken up by whatever was in the back with them. When they landed, the loadmasters said that they saw a dark figure on the ramp. And when they took off their MVGs to see better, so the ramp on the C-130 is like a cargo plane, and so it's like the ramp is extended when they're flying, so the guys are in the back looking out the back. So this figure appeared on the ramp. And when they took off their MVGs to get a better look, this figure started walking towards them and disappeared right when the flight engineer came down from the cockpit ladder. Needless to say, it definitely messed them up bad.
Yeah, that would definitely mess me up. Did they ever? God, I'd love to sit down with those guys. Did they ever describe what it looked like? You know, what this person looked like?
No, they said it just looked like I guess it's the shadow of a man. That's what they described it as. But I think I think that would mess me up pretty bad too, to see a guy just suddenly appear on the ramp of a plane. Who knows? I'm not too familiar with the legends and myths of Africa, but maybe there's some credence that maybe it's a jinn. I don't know, which I know is not an African legend. It's more of like an Islamic one. But I don't know. Maybe there's something to that.
Yeah, that would definitely spook me. I know that you have one called Dust Devils, and it made me think of I did a show one time. This guy, he had an encounter with, he saw this weird entity. I won't go into the encounter, but it was creating this weird dust devil on this farm. And I'm kind of curious about the soldier that sent you the story about the dust devils. Will you tell us about that one?
All right. So this one I call Dust Devils. I had a FOB platoon in Afghanistan. Two of my soldiers in one section were a 42-year-old Korean specialist who formerly served in the ROK Army, Republic of Korea, and a 38-year-old specialist from Ghana. Both had immigrated to the U.S. and had successful enough lives that didn't deem enlisting necessary. We had come to find out that each had a reason to enlist that can only be summarized as a divine intervention. They were great soldiers, hard workers, never complained about anything dumb, unlike some of my younger guys. And both being ESLs, English Second Language, they were hilariously making fun of each other in English all the time. The Korean specialist had left his family as a successful businessman in Washington to join the army because God had told him so. Anyway, one time, a 107 rocket bounced off the roof of a hut and went flipping through the air, making this cool noise. Everybody heard it, but he was the only one to see it, and it was coming in his exact direction. It landed about 30 meters in front of him, and then bounced again to a clamshell about 200 meters away, where it finally exploded, saving his life. So anyways, they were on night shift together, and I stopped by around 2 a.m. to check on them. The African dude tells me that there's something evil outside. The Korean tells me he hears screams. Together, they both try to describe a dust devil. Okay, pretty normal. It's a pretty normal sight in Afghanistan. And there's probably some wind howling between the main containers, and that's what they hear screams. But then I hear a scream come from over our barriers, which is where we were against the perimeter in the road. The screams did not sound human. No real enunciation of words to make out, just screams. So I jump up on the barrier to see tens of dozens of dust devils out in the open desert. Mind you, it's night, and our field of vision is really limited by only the perimeter lights. There was a guard tower next to us shining a searchlight, and everywhere it pointed, there were more and more of these little vortices. Other guard towers were illuminating the same thing, just dust devils all around us. These suckers were swarming in the open desert. 20 yards between each one. Definitely had an end of time feels to it. As for the screams, that side of the base had no village within earshot. Not enough vegetation for the shepherds. Only seen a couple camels out there, and from time to time in my head, I wrote it off as some wildcats fighting. Made me sleep better that way, I guess. The intel officer later told me that it may have been a trap set for the QRF, Quick Reaction Force, and a sandstorm had blown in to prevent any of us from leaving the wire. That one's cool, creepy.
Yeah, that's really creepy. That's really creepy. I think there is a spiritual side to this world that we just can't see at the moment. But every once in a while, I think that we get glimpses of it. And for the audience, again, go check out Nick's Instagram, Tales from the Grid Square. And you can read all of these accounts. What else you got there, Nick?
Here's another one, Wes, more along that I think your listeners would like. Sasquatch sighting at the Yakima Training Center in California, or Washington State, I'm sorry. So I think this is a Bigfoot sighting. Yakima Training Center, 2017. We're setting up a troop assembly area. It's late at night, and my driver's on security and swears he sees a dude running around from the Crow system. And the Crow system is think of a turret with a machine gun, and it has like a camera and night vision and thermal, and you sit inside a truck and use literally a joystick to move this thing around. So he sees this dude running around on the Crow system. This is the middle of nowhere in Washington with no one around us for miles. He gets a closer look and it's fuzzy, but clearly something walking around on two legs like a human. I go outside to pee and I hear this god-awful yowl in the distance. And I run back into the truck. My driver, or my gunner who is sitting on the Crow system, says that this thing, when we heard the scream, stopped and turned and looked at us. Looked right at me specifically. Needless to say, I didn't get out of the truck that night.
Yeah, and there's no government cover up. The government doesn't know anything about Sasquatch. They don't care. Isn't that what some of these cocky researchers say? Yet they seem to be, these creatures seem to be running around on their bases and no one's really doing anything about it. And I don't think that you can just walk onto a base without the military knowing that you're there. I mean, I realize, the Yakima Training Center and Fort Lewis aren't Area 51, but maybe you can answer this question for me. Can a civilian just walk onto a military base without anyone knowing? Maybe it's kind of a dumb question that you can't answer.
I can, because I have a funny story about that. So the base itself is usually separated from the training area. And so when you have the main, we call it like a main post, or it has names for it. But that's usually the area that's fenced in, has gates, like it's a controlled in and out. But when you get out to some of these training areas are so huge. We do not have the manpower to simply set up guard posts or listening posts or anything like that. So it's actually quite possible to sneak into some of these places. So when I was stationed at Fort Drum, it was actually pretty common knowledge that people went and squatted out in the training area. And you would occasionally come across signs of human life out there. Way out in the back 40, which the back 40 is a term that most people use to refer to the sticks of the training. Like, you're so far back out there, you have no cell phone reception. And it was very common to go back there and find obviously there was a fire here. There's some food wrappers, there's some human shit from where somebody had used the restroom. And one time at Fort Drum, I didn't find much information on this, if it was true or not, but there was a return to the earth type commune/cult that had made their way into the training area and were living there off the grid for a couple months. And no one knew they were back there until one day they got the bright idea, probably after smoking something, to stand in the middle of the main tank trail that goes into the training area and try to block it off to protect the environment. And apparently these people they got arrested, and I think they got jail time for trespassing. But they had been living in this training area for the longest time, and no one knew they were there until they revealed themselves. You can just walk on in some places. It's literally a sign that says, "No trespassing, government property," and you can continue.
It's probably best I never served in the military. They would have court-martialed me. We got hippies on the property, religious cult. Today we're doing artillery training, boys. But for the audience, check out Nick's Instagram. Again, it's Tales from the Grid Square. Let's do one more, Nick.
Okay. So this story is called the Back 40 Dogman Encounter. All right. So I'm stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The training area we have is called the Back 40. Thousands of acres of rangers and training sites. My story takes place in the Back 40 near a makeshift town called Cassidy. It's located in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest and thick underbrush. And at the time, it was mid-July, so everything is in full bloom. My company is conducting a 2-week field problem in this area, and after we had secured this town, my platoon was tasked with pooling a blocking position about 100 meters into the woodline from this town. So this is like day 12 of a 2-week field training problem, and I'm located on the far right of our blocking position with my squad. I'm a squad leader of my infantry platoon, and we dig into our position. I'm located 10 to 15 meters from my soldiers with my back up against a tree. Darkness is setting in the Back 40, and the guys are tired, and the team leaders are doing their checks to make sure guys are awake and not falling asleep on the line. Hours go by, but I didn't really keep track of the time, so I had to guess it was around midnight. No moon this night. The only thing you could see to our rear was the town of Cassidy. My Alpha team leader is laying with his team on the line, and we're pulling a 50-50 security detail, meaning one man is asleep and the other one's pulling security. My Bravo team leader is sleeping next to me. Our platoon radio man, RTO, was walking back and forth behind us, behind the squad leaders, checking on all others on this line. So about every 20 to 30 minutes, I hear him walking by eventually, and he comes to me and says, "Hey, Sergeant, you good on your radio batteries?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good, dude." So being used to hearing him walking by every so often, I'm not really paying attention. But then I hear something. Not even close to thinking about it, I ignore it. And then it gets closer and closer, and a lot slower in movement. I look over my shoulder and say, "What the fuck are you doing?" And that's when I see whatever it was, mid-crouch pose, about 20 meters from me, making low, subtle growling noises, like a wolf or a dog. I froze and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and my heart started to race. Whatever this was stood at least 5 feet tall, crouched, and it was sinking lower and lower to the ground, looking like it was about to pounce. Paralyzed with confusion and fear, I watched for another 10 to 12 seconds. I then reached to grab my E-tool, not taking my eyes off this thing, what I'm looking at. I quickly flipped down my PSQ-20's night vision, and as I did, this creature ran in a diagonal line from me fast. And when I say fast, he was booking it at this low stance. I flipped my 20s to thermal, and I saw the outline of this thing running. Everyone around me heard this thing crashing through the woods, and it ran too fast to be a man or too big to be a deer standing up. Later at night, another squad leader told me he heard these loud, deep sniffing noises near our position. His soldiers kept saying that they smelled what appeared to resemble a wet dog smell. Before dawn is when we all started to hear the loud, guttural sounds of something after the coyotes were done howling. They're prominent in this area, and you always hear them. Except after this howl or loud noise, they all instantly stopped. I had always heard stories and never believed it as well from others in my platoon. After this encounter, we all agreed we were not alone that night, and something is lurking out there. What I saw was canine by the look of it. It wasn't a bear. It was dark, but I don't want to speculate and give a false tale, but its face was elongated like a snout, from what I could see. I grew up playing in the woods and camping and hunting, and I've never seen or felt that way ever again.
That's really fascinating. And you know, the Dogman, for the longest time, I really thought the Dogman, people must be misidentifying this thing. But I've talked to so many people that have run into it. I don't think people are misidentifying it. I don't know what the hell the Dogman is, but I don't think people are misidentifying it by any means. And even the wildlife biologist, I don't know if you heard that show or not, Nick. These creatures seem to be physical. The wildlife biologist, Matt, I think it was 769. I might be wrong on that, but he shot it.
Oh, that story was so fascinating, Wes. So I listened to it, and what I found really interesting was people talk all the time like, "Oh, I shot Bigfoot with a 7mm or a 308 and it did nothing." And I always count that up to I think you were probably terrified and you missed your shot. But this guy, he hit it with a 45 round and it reacted, and I read it and I'm like, 45 round is not like it is not a weak round. There's some good mass flying with that bullet. But it hit the thing and it reacted to getting hit. And it was to me, it sounded like the creature was like, "What just happened to me? What is this?" Like, it didn't realize it got shot. just kind of like a very human reaction there. Yeah, that was bizarre. I have heard this one theory on the numerous numerous like Reddits, I guess, or 4chan or whatever I got on, that somebody had said that it was on a green text. That's what it was. Somebody had talked about seeing something that they thought was Dogman, but when they got a better look at it, it looked like Bigfoot in every single way except for the snout. The face was more like a baboon, which I thought was weird. So I was like, huh. So maybe it's really not a wolf. Maybe it is actually like some species of Sasquatch that looks like a baboon. I don't even know.
Yeah, I used to think that too. There is another creature that people do run into. It's very rare. It's more like a Sasquatch, but smaller. That's kind of how eyewitnesses report it. The one thing that's different about this particular creature is it has more of a head of a baboon. And witnesses report it being more aggressive. But, out of all the witnesses I've talked to, I've maybe spoke to 20 people that have run into that particular creature. The Dogman, I really think, is something separate. And I would start to drill down on my questions with people because I was like, there's no way it's an upright canine running around on two legs. That's a weird, Sasquatch is weird enough, but this is even weirder. But people are very consistent on what they tell you. I think the Dogman is very much how witnesses describe it, an upright running around canine. What it is, who knows? Hopefully one day the truth will come out and we'll all have an understanding as far as what's going on in this world, man. But Nick, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. I hope people go and check out your Instagram, Tales from the Grid Square, and follow Nick on that, on his Instagram. I'm following you now, Nick, on Tales from the Grid Square. And I've actually gone through and read some of the encounters, and it is fascinating to sit there and you get a bunch of new encounters, especially from military guys, stuff you normally don't get to hear about. But I really do appreciate your time, Nick. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share what happened to you and also share these soldiers' experiences. I think it's important work what you're doing, man.
No, thank you, Wes. Thank you so much for bringing me on. I've really been a huge fan of your show. I love what you do. I definitely say I take a lot of inspiration from what you're doing. Especially you give people a voice to tell stories that, they otherwise wouldn't tell for fear of, being labeled a loony or stories that they're even too terrified to think about.
Appreciate it, Nick. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. If you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Until next time, everyone.